The Australian Financial Review.
Hi, I'm Julianne Sprague, and in today's episode, we are going to do something different. We don't usually go on location, but when Jo Horgan, the founder of cosmetics giant Mecca, invites you into the Nerve Centre for a chat, well, who are we to say no? I'm standing in the middle of Cremorne, close to Melbourne CBD, and just a few minutes ago it was overcast and I was worried about not having a jacket, and now it's beautifully sunny. That's Melbourne for you. I'm here with our producer Alex Gow, and in a few minutes we're going to walk inside to where some of the Mecca magic is made. It's here we'll meet Jo Horgan, who in 1997 would open a cosmetics store in South Yarra and would go on to reinvent the beauty retail industry. A decade or two ago, most women who wanted to buy makeup would have simply gone to a department store. There, the staff were incentivised to sell an individual brand. Jo Horgan was working for one of those brands. It was L'Oreal, and she got an idea. She thought there had to be a better way. And there was. She ended up turning the industry on its head. I'm opposite one of the operations centre for Mecca. You can peek down a laneway and see the beautiful buildings of the Melbourne CBD. But for those of us who know Mecca, it does not look like a Mecca store. There is no glass panels, bright lights. It is a dark grey building with a simple M on the outside the doorway. It's pretty much the only sign I've got that that's Mecca, and I hope that it is, because we're going to go knock on the door. Hello.
Julianne, lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. So let's start, because I really did want to talk to you about the creation of Mecca and how we got to here.
Yes.
And I read that your parents were entrepreneurs, but then you went and studied English literature. And so I wanted to know then, does that mean you decided early on that you didn't want to be an entrepreneur and then you became one? What happened in this journey?
Okay, absolutely not. I think so my parents instilled in me the belief that education was the most important doorway in your life. And that's something I now believe. And they coupled that with do something you absolutely love. I just loved English literature. I loved languages. It was super fascinating to me.
Did you know what job you wanted to do when you were studying at university?
No, because then I went on to what I thought was a natural next step, which was, it was called a Master of Science, which is hilarious after an English literature degree, but actually it was, in effect, a Master in Mass Communications out of. So to me, this sense of English literature was the form of mass communication of the 18th, 19th centuries. And therefore, if we fast forward, what's the modern day iteration of that? And that was this mass communications platform. So that made perfect sense to me. And funnily enough, during that, I did a marketing course with a Harvard professor as one of my options. And it just sparked this interest in me. And at the same time, I was reading John Burge's Ways of Seeing about the advertising agency. And really, it talks about how the depiction of women in advertising is, I think you'd just say it's not very modern these days. It doesn't really it doesn't sort of showcase and shine a light on the multifaceted, extraordinary, intelligent, empathetic, brilliant people that were often smiling vacuously down a photo lens. So I felt that there was this sort of natural pathway for me in marketing to say, okay, how do I go into an arena and make it much more female-centric? And so that then led to the next idea of I should go into some form of marketing or some form of mass communication. And I was studying in the US, and I actually applied for a couple of roles in London.
Let me just interrupt you.
Sorry.
I'm thinking about, so where was your childhood? Where did you grow up? You've got this gorgeous English accent, but we're studying in the US and there's Australia in here somewhere. So
there's lots of Australia. I've only got an English accent because I'm tone deaf, really. And I was born and bred in the UK, Irish father, English mother, in London, went to boarding school at 7, because my parents would tuck me in every day at night from the age of 5, and I'd go, I want to go to boarding school, because I'd read these books, all the Enid Blyton books, was it Twins of St. Clair's and was it Mallory Towers of wherever she was. Anyway, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun and fabulous? And so, my parents were amazing. My father had been to boarding school and vowed that none of his children would go, and sent me anyway. So I thought that was very lovely to sort of wave off a 7-year-old into the wilds of Somerset.
I don't know. It tells me as a 7-year-old you were very convincing.
I think it was actually more just annoying and persistent, because apparently I literally every single night, this little head in the bed, that would be my final sign-off of the night. And so when I was 14 and they pulled us out of boarding school in the UK, we moved across to Australia with, 18 suitcases. We went up to the northern tip of Arnhem Land in Queensland. We all sort of drove our way down the coast of Queensland, some of the islands, the Atherton Tablelands, so coasts, the centre of Australia. They then dropped me at boarding school in Victoria as they continued merrily on their way till they got to Perth. Felt that they'd arrived at the Garden of Eden, pulled me out of boarding school in Melbourne, and I finished my schooling in Perth.
Great city, that.
Oh, isn't it? Isn't it?
Isn't it? Any opportunity I've got to plug Perth.
Oh, I am with you. Truly, I think it is the easiest city in the world to live in.
Let's go to then your... the days at L'Oreal. So you're a marketing executive at L'Oreal, is my understanding. And then at some point in time, you decide, I'm going to go and open a store. We're in 1997 now. Can you walk me through what was going on for Jo Horgan?
So I went from the US back to the UK, and from writing some cheeky letters only to the CEOs of the companies I wanted to work at, and no people in culture department for me, I settled on L'Oreal because I felt it had both the marketing aspect and how can you improve the way you interact with women. So I did that for 2 years in the UK. And then I was really yearning after Australia. And when I was over here, I realized, 1, I loved Australia. 2, I was very far away from the action. I was a very small cog in an enormous machine. And that there were some incredibly exciting things going on in beauty, just the seedlings of a movement of indie brands.
Just to give context for people listening, because we just all know Mecca now, but back in the 90s, it really was department stores, right? Like it was just so they controlled everything. The makeup industry and cosmetics industry, and it was big powerhouse brands, and that was pretty much it, right?
And I think this is the really interesting point. The department stores had 80% market share in Australia, for example, totally run by men for an immediate financial outcome. And I felt it was almost this very cozy agreement between brands and department stores of let's just tell women how they can interact with beauty. Counters, you've got to go from counter to try my brand, and then you go to another counter to try another brand, and another counter to try a third brand. And by the time you get to the third counter, you're probably exhausted. And there were already maybe, 20 brands, and you were never going to get the best mascara from one and the best blusher from another and the best foundation for you from another and the best eyebrow pencil. It just wasn't going to happen like that. You were going to go pretty vertically with one brand. And I looked at the industry as it was. I felt that it was stacked against choice and access to all the information and all the products that you would want in a way that was personalized to you. And I felt there had to be a better way. And so you suddenly had these new indie brands that were
I was going to ask about
emerging.
That. And is that's sort of important, right? Because I sit there and
hugely
think
important.
You can have your views, and most women would have agreed with you, but then there is this relationship with these big brands, and they're stitched up with the department stores. And so you're going to go and set up your own store, but then how are you going to sell? Like, who's going to sell to you?
And so I think there is no question, and I will say this every day of the week, that there is luck that is involved in business. And my luck was being in the right place at the right time. And you can read Malcolm Gladwell's, is it The Tipping Point, that one? I think it might be The Tipping Point, where he talks about the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates. They were in the right place, Silicon Valley, at the right time to be able to harness this huge change in the IT world. It's the same with me and Mecca. For the first time, manufacturers were emerging outside of the major players. And so indie brands were able to go to these manufacturers and ask for tiny quantities, often backed by the manufacturer who would actually help fund these tiny brands. So these brands were just green shoots, tiny little green shoots coming out of the ground at a time when the status quo with the major brands and department stores, I think, had just become too cozy. So two things were changing at the same time. It's like, okay, imagine if you harness these brands and then you put them into an independent environment.
So can you remember the first day? Do you remember opening the doors of South Yarra when you...
So vividly. I may not remember the 10,000 days or whatever it's been since then, but the first day is just always indelibly etched in my mind.
What happened?
We had our launch party, which felt fabulous. And then a few sort of well-wishers bought a couple of things, and then silence.
I was going to say, was it an instant success, or you just opened the doors and then they're all still at the department store?
It was very much the latter.
Yeah, great.
Opened the doors and it was so quiet. I think we did $1,600 in the first day. I think we did $5,000 in the first week.
I read you lost that first day's takings.
I know. See, sort of things really can be stacked against you. But as I have always said, I am a natural optimist. And rather than having a voice in my head that said, oh, you're so stupid, how could you ever let that happen? And how does this bode for the rest of this adventure that you're on? This is such a bad omen. I was like, oh, well, onwards and upwards. There's always tomorrow, and there's 10 million brilliant things about this, and I'm not going to focus on that one thing. And truly, and it was a choice. I remember thinking at that moment, there are two paths I can go down here, the Debbie Downer or the sort of Sunshine Sally. I am choosing Sunshine Sally. I'm going up. For the first week, I think we did $5,000. And, it was the real early adopters who were coming in. It was me on my own on a Sunday because I couldn't afford to pay the rates for anyone else. There were only 4 of us. And I sort of educated the others in the front room for 2 weeks because education was still really important. It was like, come to my front room. I'm going to teach you all about it here. I had no idea what I was doing.
So let's talk about how you go from one store in South Yarra to there's now more than 100 Mecca stores, and you've got these flagship stores now that would be beyond your wildest dreams when you're opening up in South Yarra with just like IKEA furniture or whatever you were kitting out your first store with. How did you get to there? People will be listening to this thinking, how do you sort of get that growth going? Is it a few years before you get enough cash flow coming through that you can open up more stores, or do you have to sort of borrow to open up stores to build the brand? How do you tackle it in the early years?
With great difficulty. And my accountant, he's not working within Mecca, he's our accountant 25 years later. But 4 years in, he sat me and Pete, husband, down and said, some businesses just aren't meant to be, and maybe this is one of them. As we had lost money for 4 years and we didn't have money to lose. So, it was hard.
Sorry to interrupt. I just was keen on the conversation you have then with Pete. So Pete Wetnell, your husband. Was he husband at the time then?
He was, yes.
And he wasn't... We'll get to when he's working at Mecca, but at the time he wasn't working at Mecca. He had an in inverted commas day job.
Yes, he did. Day job and a night job.
So what was the conversation like? Were you got an accountant telling you, well, this isn't looking good, you're bleeding cash?
It's something I say often. I quote Sheryl Sandberg from Lean In, and I say, and I recount her telling that she feels the single most important decision you can make if you want to be a successful operator, if you are to choose to have a partner who lifts you up, who multiplies your power, not a partner who diminishes or deadens your drive or opportunity. So Pete was, from the outset, incredibly supportive, to the point where he literally guaranteed the bank loan that got Mecca off the ground against his future salary. So he was an indentured slave to the bank. Literally, if it had all gone pear-shaped, he would have been working to pay the bank back. So you could think that 4 years in, he might have had enough of this, and he might also have thought, this time for a tricky conversation. But he was also incredibly supportive from the outset, helping with everything from writing up business plans to working on the weekends, and sometimes before work, and usually always after work on the business alongside me. He was naturally curious. And I think he believed both in the concept, and he was super supportive of me. And I think we felt that we were in this together. So there was never a conversation where he would echo the sentiment of calling it quits. It was always, what do we do now?
Boots in.
Boots in. What do we do? How do we change the trajectory? What do we need to do now? How do we pivot? What is next that gets this on the right trajectory?
And so we will discuss him. So I need to get the timeline right. So I think Pete joins in 2014. So this would have been... 2005?
I think it's 2005.
2005, sorry. No, 2014 was Sephora. That's the bit we'll
that's another one.
That's another story.
Yeah.
But so the business, your accountant is saying 4 years in, time to call it quits. He's still working. He's given the guarantee, and then you go off, open more stores. Is that how the success, sort of the momentum builds with the new store?
So the momentum builds incredibly slowly, and again back to how do we make this happen? So the first store, you said, did that have IKEA furniture? No, it did not, because I had a really clear vision of what I felt the offer had to be. We had to have the most exciting brands in an environment where you'd love to paper the walls, paper the doors at the front and the glass at the front, and be happy to live in that environment. And that it was supported by the most extraordinarily friendly, edutainment-esque interactions. So with people who I've come to coin the phrase that become your best beauty friends. So I was super clear that those are the three things that I would not compromise on. We spent all our money on that first fit out, the brands for the first store. So for the second store, which we opened 2 months later, there was no money for a new shop fit. So George's, which was the new lifestyle store, approached us, and they wanted to have Mecca as pretty much 50% of their beauty offer. And so we went into George's, where it was their fit out. It was they were in effect providing the entire environment for us to be able to create Mecca. And when George's opened, we did exceptionally well from the outset, and it was a real proof of concept moment. Because, tiny shop that's less than 5 meters wide, which is, by the way, retail death. For anyone who wants to be a retailer out there, having a store that's thinner and more narrow than 5 meters, not a good idea. Anyway, so, in Turag Road, sort of opposite a train station, that was never really going to be the proof of concept. George's was. And the whole of George's closed a year later. More than 50% of our turnover went up in smoke with less than a month's notice. But again, David Jones had been wanting us to go into David Jones. And so literally the day of, I'm like, right, we'll come in if we can do a temporary store in Melbourne. We need it to be open within a month. So we literally made that happen.
So that's some of the early challenges thrown at you.
There are so many more.
How, just your personality. So you sort of rise to the occasion. So if there's a problem thrown at you, you don't look at it as it's always going to be a problem, but how do you sort of cope in those situations?
Understanding what you are encoded to do early on as a person when you go into business is exceptionally helpful because it allows you to focus on what you're good at, and it also allows you to surround yourself with people who will shore up the areas that you're not good at. And I think I'm a natural problem solver, and I think that I'm naturally tenacious. I have sayings of, I'm not interested in no, I'm interested in how. It's a shoe brand, Nike, just do it. It's just don't navel gaze, get on with it and find a way and ask people for help because people will lean in and help you.
So can you remember one or two moments where you had to do that, where your back's against the wall and you're thinking, okay, let's be optimistic? Like, can you sort of give me an example of when things have crumbled before your very eyes, or just those moments in time?
There have been so many. I'll try and really focus on the times when the business could have fallen over as a result. Most of those moments happen when you're tiny because, for example, if more than 50% of your business disappears with less than 1 month's notice, 1 year in, that is a very fragile time for the business. Another one was very early on that the US dollar became much more expensive against the Australian dollar. So my cost of goods to buy a lipstick went up more than 70%. You can't just then go, no problem, let's just ask the customer to pay 70% more for that lipstick tomorrow. You go out of business overnight with that sort of approach. So that was another truly teetering on the edge moment of, my costs have gone through the roof. What can I possibly do and how do I approach that? And so that was going to the brands and saying, you have to help me, you have to come halfway with me on this journey. And I had to cut every other cost imaginable from the business. I had to increase prices at 5 and 10% so that I had, and so I literally broke it all down and go, right, what can I get from that? What can I get from that? What can I get from that? And so it's just problem solving. And I saw so many businesses fall over during that time. It was a very sobering reminder that you are not always in control of your own destiny. You may not be in control. It's what you do and how you react that you control, and really focus on that. That has been a mantra.
Okay. When we come back from the break, I want to talk to you about something that was out of your control and it really threatened the business. It's 2014. Global cosmetics giant Sephora decides it's coming to Australia. I want to chat to you about how you respond. So Jo, we've spoken about how you felt you were in the right place at the right time. Your husband Peter has joined you at Mecca. The business is growing. And now Sephora comes to join the party. Let's talk about that time. What do you do?
Well, I think any competition that comes into the market is a good thing if it ensures that you focus on what you are about and you make sure that you double and triple down on that. And we were crystal clear that we are all about the customer experience and a really high-touch environment where there are many best beauty friends who are in there to share their expertise and to make it entertaining and informative, all rolled into one. And we knew that we had, over 15 years of history with the brands that we carried, and they really trusted us, and they had grown their businesses as we had grown our business. And those deep relationships allowed us to continue forth with a very clear vision of where we were going that they shared. So
but now there would be some battle lines, wouldn't there? Like your business is of a size and there's Sephora. So how do you go about getting those new brands or getting brands in? Like from the outside in, it's just like, Charlotte Tilbury, and I could rattle off a whole bunch of other brands that just pop up at Mecca. But like how involved is that process and what's the... Just go behind the scenes. So what if I'm Julianne Sprague cosmetic holdings. How do I get into Mecca?
You say Charlotte Tilbury. Interestingly, again, we were talking to Charlotte and her team a year before she actually launched the brand. So with so many of these brands, we connect with them as they are tiny little seeds. We understand what they're going through. We understand what it takes to support them. And because right at the outset, nobody was thinking about Australia. And it's like, don't worry, we'll do everything for you. We will, ship the goods. We will make them come into the different stores. We'll do all the education. We'll do all of the marketing. We will do all of the reporting, and we'll come back to you and tell you all about it. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to think about the market.
Just sign with us exclusively. That's all you've got to do.
Basically, if you want to see your brand flourish, choose an environment where it is all about the customer and where we take the brand DNA and it's like literally a lightning rod directly to the customer through a beautiful store environment.
So the business is, I don't know if it's galloping, that's probably the wrong term, but the business is growing. You're going from strength to strength. And then there's a moment where Pete's going to come and join full time. Can we talk about what it's like for your husband to come join the business as a co-CEO? How you navigated bringing someone that you spend your personal life with into your work life? What happened around that time?
First of all, I think I've already said I married incredibly well in that I have just this kindred spirit who's so comfortable in his own skin, super bright, every quality that you would want alongside you in business. That helps. And we made the decision on my birthday going for a hike, which he always organised on my birthdays with a lunch afterwards. And we had one child, and the thought of having another child with
your other child, which we'll call Mecca,
which the other child asking for huge amounts of attention, and BCG being an incredibly demanding job, felt relatively insurmountable. And Pete, one of his areas of expertise at BCG was retail. And he was super fascinated in the business, and it was growing, and it was growing quickly. And it was a risk for him to come across. And the incredible thing about Pete was he did not come in all guns a-blazing. He observed and learned the business and started building more and more insight. And then he was able to contribute so wholeheartedly as a result of that. And, it's funny, we agreed that, someone told us this actually, if you're going to work together, there can only be one boss. Don't argue in front of the team and sit as far away as possible. So it's like, well, we can't sit that far apart. We cannot argue in front of everybody because he's so reasonable. And I was like, well, and I have to be the boss, right? Because I started, and he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And then I realized a couple of years later, I'm like, he's doing everything on stock, and he's also managing the finance. There is no retail without stock and without money. So really, who is the boss here? And it made me realize that you can actually have two.
You can have two bosses, or did he? I read somewhere you described it as it was classic Pete because he would never put a frog into boiling water.
Oh, yeah.
He would bring it
slowly to the boil. Absolutely. Which is genius, right?
He knows his wife well, is what I think. He just got there in the end.
27 years later, we should know each other well.
What would your advice be then for people who might be working with their other halves? What's the lessons you've learnt?
I think respect each other's strengths enormously and focus on those. Share everything, the good, the bad and the ugly. Celebrate the wins together, support each other through the cold and lonely moments, and find something that means your brain cannot spend the entire amount of time on work. So for us, it was two very demanding children who didn't give two hoots about Mecca. You come home and it's just, tools down, dinner.
But they can be quite grounding. I think that
it's amazing.
Particularly for this series, we're talking to female founders, and so children are part of that mix. But I think sometimes too they can be beneficial to your circumstance.
I think, and this may sound funny, certainly for people who are going through sort of, when they're tiny, it is slightly Groundhog Day. You know, every day you wake up and go, oh my God, we're going to do the same thing again. I'm going to do nappies. I'm going to do tantrums. I'm going to do pureed food.
Someone get me out of here.
So, yeah, all of those things. But it is incredibly grounding because it makes you be in the moment. They demand your total and entire attention. And it's brilliant. There is the most precious thing sitting there in front of you. And you be humbled by that, and you do what you're told, which is turn up and be present.
Yeah, I've got a 4-year-old, and I can tell you she is the most demanding boss I have ever had, without a shadow of a doubt, actually. But I don't want to dwell too much on my home life because then we'll have no time to discuss other important issues. And I really did want to talk to you about gender equality. What do you think we need to do to increase female workforce participation?
Well, I spend a lot of time on gender equality, in effect, and workforce participation is part of that. There are many other levers that are critical. Education of women, for me, is an absolute obsession. And at Mecca, we put 4% of our turnover into education and engagement of our team members, because we believe that if you have the right intrinsics, we can teach you and you can grow. So that, I think, helps workforce participation because it allows women to go into lots of different areas and be flexible in how they approach their work. I believe passionately in superannuation for women because the greatest emerging, the fastest growing area of poverty is women over 65 who have no superannuation. So we pay superannuation on all parental leave. I also look at it and go, again, more broadly, there are so many levers that need to be pulled. And so we established Mecca Empower. And a few years ago, the original idea was to educate 10,000 girls, Victoria, Australia, Northern Territories, Sub-Saharan Africa by 2025. We did that by the end of last year. And we then relaunched Mecca Empower, where we now work with 20 organisations that have a lens on gender equality, and workforce participation is part of that. But, I think education is a key part of it, and political representation. I'll just give you one other. So I'm lucky enough that I found an amazing bank manager who was willing to take an absolute risk on us and the idea and put that against Pete's future salary. Not many women have that luxury, before kids, before commitments, before any of those things. And less than 3% of VC funds go to women-owned or run businesses. So the amount of capital out there for women to start their own businesses is paltry in comparison. That's one example of how we need to address this gender inequality to allow full workforce participation. Because Mecca now, Mecca's 96% women in our workforce. One of the first points of Mecca, or one of my first objectives was was to start a female-founded business where we got women together and we showed that women could create a successful company collectively, and we could build each other up and create something really fantastic as a collective.
And you have. It's an amazing business. I'm a fangirl from way back. But why... maybe the advice here needs to be for people in the finance industry or the VC sector or people who might be listening to this. Mm-hmm. What do you want to tell those people because the funding is still
woeful. That was 2021 stats, so yeah, exactly. I don't think things have changed that much in the last 2 years. And I do think there are amazing male champions of change out there, and I think there are phenomenal mentors out there. Many of my mentors have been men, and that's why I say to everybody, ask people for help, because it's extraordinary how many people will lean in and give you help. So I probably wouldn't waste the precious time banging on to VC funds on what they should do. Sorry, now I forgot what the question was.
Women will get out there and just do it, and then the VC funds can look back and then they can see examples of Jo Horgan at Mecca and go, wow, wish I got in on that one early. Oh well, sucks to be them.
Can I tell you, I think that it is a hard road for anyone to do their own business, and it's very cold and lonely. That said, there is a J-curve that can come from perseverance, and Mecca in the last 5 years has grown more than it did in the first 20 years combined.
Wait. But in that last 5 years was COVID.
And you asked a question earlier around what have been some of the challenges, and I sort of talked, the early ones. And COVID was one of those business existence threatening moments. And what was so incredible about COVID for us is that we still act like to quote Hamilton, young, scrappy and hungry. We're very entrepreneurial, we move fast, and we do believe that everything is possible, genuinely. And when COVID happened, the way in which the team galvanized into action, with everything from us being the very first people going to the bank asking for a facility that would last us 2 years of a shutdown, so that we knew that we could then make decisions that would put us in a great position when we came out of it. We went from doing about 15% of our business online as a total to doing 100% of the business of the year before online within sort of 4 weeks. I cannot tell you the way in which the teams pivoted. We created a school down here in support centre in between that first and second lockdown, so that people who had kids who hadn't yet gone back to school could actually come in, and there were uni students that would help the kids, so that because again, women were the people who had the greatest burden of education through COVID. So we tried to pivot at every single twist and turn.
Do you think being a private business allows you to do that?
Oh, the joys of being a private business. We made so many decisions that were not cost-focused, but human-first focused. I look at it and I think having a private business allows you to have one focus, and that is the customer. I think as soon as you become a publicly listed business, you have a responsibility to shareholders, of which there are usually many, and I think that takes up a lot of headspace and time. So I treasure the autonomy of a business where we literally can do whatever we think is right for the customer. We can take whatever risks we want to see. How incredible can we make this beauty world? And how many tests and trials can we do?
You sound busy. It just sounds busy. And so this question I want to ask, we're asking everybody in the series, but I'm really interested in what you've got to say about this, which is your productivity hack. What is the one thing you might do in your day, or the one thing you don't do in your day, that allows you to do more, to get more done? Like, what do you do, Jo?
One, surround yourself with unbelievable people, give them enormous autonomy and let them get on with it. That's the only way you can have more than one store in South Yarra. And the more that you're willing to do that, the more incredible the journey for everyone becomes. Secondly, I meditate every day. I actually just meditated before I came here. That was my meditation of the day.
Is there a room in the
There
centre?
is. There's meditation rooms. Not here in support centre. There are wellness and meditation rooms, and I went into one with my sensate, and I meditated for 20 minutes before I came here, so that I would be in the moment for this. And that, I think, gives me great clarity in what I do. And then the last thing, my husband gave me a book at Christmas called 4,000 Weeks, and it's about embracing your finitude. Is, in effect, there are 10 million things coming at you, and being able to, on the fly, work out which are the most important, and not getting caught up in the noise of everything else. And don't get me wrong, I get on a plane and I just beyond love that for one moment in my life I can have a really tidy inbox. Heaven. Is that the most useful way I can spend my time? No, it's not. Work Smarter, Live Better is a book by Cyril Perpignan that I didn't have time to read for 3 years. Another book Pete gave me to read. And then I read it. I loved it so much. And Cyril came in and he has sort of really changed the way everyone approaches the way they operate in Mecca. And so that is now all of those productivity hacks sort of embedded in what I do, but I don't really think about them anymore. They're just there, and it's sort of set and forget.
It's the way of life.
It's just, do you know what? Life's busy, business is messy. Feel comfortable with both of those. And I don't want to be the person to say this, but I just don't think you can have it all. And I am incredibly family focused, and I love what I do beyond anything and just have the best time. And I don't get to spend any time pretty much with friends. And that's a trade-off.
Well, it sounds like you read well, and I think that's one of my takeaways, Jo. So
if I could say to read one book, I would do to any person who's looking at starting a business. This has been the greatest gift in my business life, is Jim Collins' Good to Great.
Okay.
And we actually got to spend time with Jim Collins at his Boulder lab last September for 2 days as a leadership team, defining our BHAG for the next 25 years and our flywheel, which we've just introduced to everybody back here. And, you know, it is, I think, this ability to read and be naturally curious and apply that to what you do.
Amazing. I think we're going to have to finish recording here, but we might set up another episode on the interesting people Jo Horgan's met in her life. I just feel like there's a tour.
No, I don't know anybody. Can I tell you something? I'm obsessive. So Jim Collins, this has been like, I've had my eye on getting into see him. I first read this book in 2003. I read it every year. And that was one of my vision boards. This is what's going to happen. I don't have time to meet a lot of people, so I am very judicious. Mickey Drexler, he's the best retailer in the world. I found a way to meet him and get him to be a mentor. Like, I choose people and I go after them.
I love it because, Jo, I have hounded you for quite some time to get you to talk to me. So maybe in the end maybe you could see yourself somewhere in the persistent focal. So
I do love persistent.
I thank you for agreeing to sit down and chat with us because it was a fantastic discussion. Thanks for listening to Female Founders, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And for more insight on entrepreneurs, subscribe to The Financial Review. Go to afr.com/subscribe. This podcast was presented by me, Julianne Sprague, edited by Lap Fan, produced by Lap Fan and Alex Gow, and our theme is by Alex Gow, and executive producer is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.